Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. And when fortune smiles, I got a chance today to speak to a absolutely epic rhythmist and a guy who's been doing it for the last, my God, almost 8 decades rather. And from a decorated family, the father, Joe Porcaro. Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. How are you, my man?
Great, Jake.
Can you talk?
Good to see you, man.
Good to see you, man. What does it mean to be inducted into the Percussive Arts Hall of Fame in Indianapolis this Thursday? You're not somebody I that gets hung up on awards, but what does it mean to you at this point in your career?
Wow. Well, it made all the hard work through the years come to, an incredible kind of ending, and feel so honored to join all my heroes. My teacher, Alexander Lepak, is in the PAS Hall of Fame, and all my favorite drummers, Max Roach and Roy Haynes and people like that, So it's really a prestigious honor for me.
Did Lepak, he got Emil a gig with Arthur Fielder, I think. Did Lepak help you get your first gigs?
Well, we were both, Emil and I, we were in the Hartford Symphony together.
Right.
I was in it a little bit before Emil, and we needed our mallet player left, and we needed a mallet player, and I was into mallets a little bit, but I didn't, I had to memorize the parts back in those days. So I told Lepak, who's the head of the section, about a friend of mine, I grew up with, which is Emil Richards. And I told him what an incredible mallet player he was. I mean, when we were like 13, 14 years old, we come home from junior high school, and we come by Emil's house, and we go upstairs, and Emil would always put on a show. He put a blanket on his marimba and play Flight of the Bumblebee. I mean, freaked everybody out, And then when Lepak came to Emil's house, Emil auditioned up at his house, and Lepak had him play some, material from some of the xylophone, parts from some of the famous parts, from the famous composers. Anyways, he freaked right away, and then they started playing duets together, And then Emil, got drafted in Korean War, and he went and to Korea, and he ended up in Japan.
Yeah, in Sendai, he got there. The earthquake knocked him out of bed in the first thing in the morning, but he was wound up there with Toshiko Akiyoshi.
Right, and then when Emil left, we didn't have a mallet player, so I had been studying. Lepak, he says, "Come on, give it a shot." I mean, at least you'll have enough time to memorize the parts, Thanks a lot, Lepak. And so, but I did it because, I had aspirations of maybe someday going to New York or LA, Years ago, I met Petrillo, Caesar Petrillo, the head of the union, and back then it was all out of Chicago. And he offered to have me come to Chicago, or if I wanted to go to New York, he would help me get my union cards, And that happened from a gig I had up in New Hampshire, a summer resort. But anyways, that's how it all started, with Emil and the Hartford Symphony.
A lot of people they were very inspired by your playing on the cymbals, and I just was hoping, how did you develop your own individual sound on the kit? You're one of the most unique cats I've ever seen in my life, and you definitely are not overly reliant on the bass drum. And I'm just trying to figure out who your influences were and how you really. Did you play in strip clubs? Did you play for shake dancers? I'm just trying to get an idea of how you developed your own sound.
Well, I did it all,
I know you did.
I played in Hartford. There was a club called Charles Steakhouse, and we had a trio: piano, drums and saxophone, no bass. But we played for all these famous strippers. So I got a,
At a steakhouse.
it was a Child's Steakhouse, very famous steakhouse in Hartford.
Wow.
And place was just mobbed with, well, Hartford's the insurance capital of the world.
Sure.
And all these big, Aetna and so on, all these big insurance business people used to come to Charles Steakhouse to see. I forgot the names of the strippers, but they were all the famous.
They were coming to eat steak.
Sally Rand.
Yeah.
was one of them.
Wow.
And then I had a gig at the El Morocco in Bristol, Connecticut, and the oud player in the band, he was a bass player, but he played the oud. And we played for these belly dancers.
Right.
And everything was in 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. That's when I, was able to learn how to play in the odd meters. That was one of the greatest gigs I ever had as far as education with rhythm, And these dancers, man, if in 5 or 7 or 9, whatever, the time signature one was, with their finger cymbals, these girls were just incredible. And I could not mess with them because they were so right on.
Well, they were doing finger.
Ding it the ding 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 it the ding ding in 7, 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3.
Could you demonstrate a little bit on the kit?
Yeah.
And they were shaking. They were dancing to that.
They were doing it all.
Kenny Barron, great pianist from in Philadelphia. The first time that he really was touched, where his heart was touched by music, was when he saw Coltrane and Elvin playing together, just a duo. McCoy and Jimmy kind of took a break, and they went for 40 minutes.
Wow.
And they didn't repeat one idea. That's what was most stimulating to Kenny. It wasn't the time length. It was the idea they did not repeat one idea. And I just wanted you to talk about, especially with Emil, early on, the kind of games you would play, and also how you guys learned not to repeat ideas, how you continued to increase vocabulary in music. Your generation was the biggest increaser in the vocabulary of music. Outside of, you're you are from Bird and Dizzy's generation. How did you increase musical vocabulary together?
Well, as the years go by, and then having a good foundation to start off with, as far as rhythm. Amo too, but I was very fortunate that I had a great teacher like Al Lipak. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here today with music. He was.
What was the foundations as a human being? Because now, it wasn't machine. There were no machines. So
no, it's just all the basic theory that you're supposed to, master in music. Like in rhythm and solfege. He had us do it all. But I just was a fantastic foundation. And from there, which the foundation, of course, was, becoming a good sight reader, getting into metric modulation, and so on, polyrhythms.
Can you talk about, for the audience, for the lay people, metric modulation, how you apply that on the bandstand?
Okay, if you're in 3/4 time, and the accent, 3/4, I'll beat eighth notes. You're in 1 2 3, 1 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3, 1. So with those two accents, 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1, 1 2 3, Now I'm in 6/8. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm in a whole different feel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1 and 2 and back to 3 and 3 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on.
But you had to make it dance music too. It was dance music.
Oh yeah.
Yet this
You know, I know it was dance music, but what are you referring to when you say it was dance music? You're talking about with the belly dancers?
Well, just in general, the sweat, even the way you were just clapping there, it was danceable. It wasn't too.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't. You stayed within the. There were parameters to it, and you were able to stay within that to make it danceable, even though there were clearly odd time signatures.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, the dancers would have to be dancers that had studied rhythms and learned about metric modulation. And of course, sure, they could learn it very easily if they worked on it, you know, and a good teacher exposed them to it, you know. No problem.
Have so many people inspired all over the world watching Joe Porcaro burn on the drum kit here. I mean, Emil went to the. Did you get a chance to play alongside or ever get to see Eddie Marshall play?
Oh my God, I sure did.
Talk a little bit. Eddie is so deep in my soul. I've never met the guy, but I mean, talk about painting, man. I mean, because he was I think he was in with Toshiko either before or after you and Emil were with her.
Oh, okay, here's what happened with Eddie Marshall and Toshiko. Emil met Toshiko while he was in
That's right.
Japan during the Korean War. And then George Wein, Toshiko was what do they call a child prodigy in jazz.
Oscar Peterson saw her, and
Yeah,
that's right.
but everybody claimed the fame, according to George Wein, is she sounded so much like the jazz piano, Bud Powell.
Bud.
Okay, George Wein, when he heard her, he freaked. So he sponsored her. This is the story with Toshiko. He sponsored her to come to Berkeley in Boston. But at that time, it wasn't Berkeley. It was called the Schillinger House. And it was just maybe turned to Berkeley, but it was originally the Schillinger House. So Toshiko, George Wein brings her to Boston, and Boston is so close to Hartford, she hooks up with Emil, and she goes down to Hartford to visit Emil. And I get a phone call from Emil, and he says, I'm sitting home on Front Street on the east side of Hartford. And Emil says, what are you doing? I says, I'm just hanging, And he says, can you come over to the house? I says, why? He says, I got this Japanese piano player visiting me, and she's looking for a drummer. She's going to be playing at Storyville in Boston. George Wayne's bringing her over, and he wants her to play as the intermission band. He wants her to put together a trio to play for the acts that come in,
Bass, piano, drums.
Bass, piano, drums. So I go over to Emil's house, and Emil had a set of drums there. Emil had drums also, and he played drums. Well, Toshiko just started calling out tunes, and we were jamming, trading 4s and 8s and all that, And she says, would you come to Boston with me, for, a month or so? And I was married, no, I wasn't. Yes, I was married.
You were married.
What's the matter with me? And I had my wife and 2 kids at the time, Jeff and Mike. And I asked my wife if I could go. She says, come on, you got to go. So I went up to Boston with Toshiko. And we were the intermission band.
Was Pettiford on bass? Who was on bass?
No, Wyatt Ruther.
Well, I'm not even familiar with
Bull,
that.
they called him Bull Ruther. Man.
Bull
he
Ruther.
was wonderful. And once in a while, John Neves played with us, when Bull Ruther was busy. And the group was Toshiko, Bull Ruther, myself, and Boots Mazzulli, alto player that used to play with Stan Kenton's band. He was on alto. And we were it wasn't a trio, it was a quartet. And I couldn't believe it, man. My first gig was with Miles Davis was the lead act, and they just came from the Newport Jazz Festival. They were coming to Storyville, and that's the band with Coltrane,
Cannon,
Red Garland.
Red Garland.
Yes, and Paul Chambers on bass, and Philly Joe Jones. that was the band that broke it up at Newport. So dig this. I go to the club early to see if I had to set my drums up, along with his. And George Wayne says, no, you're going to use the drummer's drums. Well, I don't know I wasn't that familiar with Philly Joe Jones, I have to be honest, I thought it might be Roy Haynes or somebody.
Sure.
Or Max Roach, Well, it's Philly Joe Jones. And I'm left-handed. So I just got to tell you this. The very first night, I go to the club and I start turning the drums around, and this guy comes up to me from the bar. He said, "Hey man, what are you doing with my drums?" I said, I'm sorry, I'm turning them around because I'm left-handed and I'm the drummer with Toshiko. He goes, "Well, man, you can't lower the cymbals because I tighten them with the pliers. We can't be doing that between sets." So I had to play, he's like over 6 foot tall. His cymbals way up high. And I'm trying to play all night. By the end of the night, my arm was paralyzed. But anyways, he was sweet.
This is so important because I get off on drummers like George Marsh and David Garibaldi and so many a little more modern, but now going back to Wes and Baggs and hearing Philly Joe and then hearing Philly Joe with Elmo Hope. Yeah, I've never heard anybody play so free but with such order.
Yeah.
I mean, can you talk about, had you heard?
Yeah, but wait a minute.
Yeah.
Before we go further, I want to finish Eddie Marshall.
Well, no, we need to get, and also I want to also tell you about one thing about Toshiko because I interviewed her.
Yeah.
And what happened was Oscar Peterson came to see her performances in Japan. And the way she got over here was by Oscar recommending to Norman Granz for her to do an album. So she actually cut an album on Verve before coming to the Schillinger House. I just wanted to add that to the whole thing.
Well, I didn't know her then. I never knew that story. Yeah, all I know what happened with George Wayne.
Eddie Marshall, go.
So Eddie Marshall. So I was in. This is a few years later now, right? I got a bigger family. 4 kids, and anyways, I'm doing this. I was the house drummer at this jazz club in Hartford. I worked casuals for the top casual leader in town, Paul Landeman, a great trombone player. He and his brother had a casual band office, and I did all his work. But he knew I played jazz, and I was my first love. So he says, "Look, I got called from this high blind hotel in Hartford." In the cocktail lounge, they want to start having jazz there. Would you like to be the drummer? Help me put together a trio. So I did. So anyways, we would get like Randy Weston, all these groovy piano players from New York to come up. And we got horn players, Zoot Sims, Al Cohen.
Was Jackie Byard coming up?
Jackie Byard.
Yeah. Byard was a sick drummer. Nobody knows that, but he was an amazing drummer.
How about his tenor playing?
Jackie can play tenor too? Oh, man, dude.
He would take his tenor out. People would go to like the symphony concerts, and after the concerts, the high blind was close by, and they'd come for a cocktail, before they went home. And there's Jackie, man, we were playing as a trio, and then at some point in the tune, he had his saxophone out, and he started blowing with us. And you should have heard him play tenor.
Oh, my God.
So anyways,
wow.
I did this gig for a couple of years. And all of a sudden, 1 month, they bring in Toshiko. And she's going with Charlie Mariano then.
That's right.
So I told Paul, well, look, she's got a saxophone player she hangs with. And can you hire him also? He says, no problem. So they came, and we played for a week at the High Blind, for a whole week. Then Toshiko says, would you come with me on the road? Charlie, likes the way the group is sounding. And by the way, Frank Sinatra's bass player, Gene
Chirico.
Good for you,
Yeah,
man.
no, I'm on top. 7,000 interviews, dude. 4,000 interviews.
Gene Chirico came on bass, and that was the group.
It's
I
cooking.
says, Tosh, I can't. I'm married. I play in the
4
symphony
kids.
and 4 kids. And I knew.
And you were getting good bread from the symphony.
Oh, well, not good.
Enough
bread.
to support your family.
Yeah, but my main bread came from Paul Landeman, the music contractor. So anyways, I told Toshiko, I got a drummer for you that'll knock your butt off. And she says, who? And I said, Eddie Marshall up in Springfield. You ever hear of him? She said, no. I said, I'll tell you what, tomorrow night, or even if you want the whole weekend, I'll take off. And I want you to hear this cat.
Oh, dang.
And you're going to love him. So I got a hold of Eddie Marshall. He came down. They took him on the road. They freaked over him. And then he moved out here. He moved to San Francisco.
Well, and I know
and
him
I'm so
from
mad about that, man, because I never once had a chance to see Eddie Marshall while he lived out here. And I loved his playing, man. He was incredible.
Well, we're having a ball. I mean, Joe, it's just Eddie's soul is deep inside. I mean, you listen to his stuff that when he came out here.
Tastiest drummer I ever met.
Ever. And you gave him the portal to get to Toshiko, which is, there's a cat that I wanted. Did you ever? Okay, because there was a cat, you might know him as Wavy Gravy. He was, a poet at the Gaslight Theater. At the time, he was known as Hugh Romney, and he used to have a gig at the Golden Lion, which was somewhere near Hartford, and he used to bring up Jackie Byard and Don Ellis. And I'm just curious, did you ever play behind any of the beat poets? Did you ever play behind any poets
No.
ever? Never.
No, I didn't get into that. Well, I never was offered it.
Never offered that gig?
No, Robert, no, never.
Mike Mainieri's tuning in, and he's a dear friend of the program. And you wound up in the studio in '62 on the other side of the blues with Mike Mainieri.
Blues on the other side.
Blues on the other side. What? Can you talk about how that came together?
Yeah, same thing. I was playing at the High Blind, and our piano player was Bruce Martin, groovy little, incredible little piano player. He was just a kid then too, and I'm trying to think of the bass player.
It was Julie, or at least on the session, it was a woman. It looked like.
No, but I'm talking about they brought Mike into the High Blind. Okay, and that's where we met. Mike and I. We met at the High Blind, and there's a picture.
Yeah.
You could take a picture of. There it is. Bruce Martin, me on drums. That's the High Blind, and there's what's his name?
Mainieri.
Mike Mainieri.
Oh my dear, that is,
And I
look
was-
at Mainieri. I mean, dude, he's having a.
And I can't remember the bass player. He went to the art school. I think he was from New Haven or Bridgeport.
Look at you,
But
guy.
a groovy bass player, man. And we played in Chicago for a whole month. A whole month on the south side of Chicago. Same club.
What was the name of the club?
I don't even know the name of the club, man. It was just a neighborhood. No, seriously. It was a neighborhood bar. They were very nice to us. And they, invited us. The kitchen was open to us in case we were hungry, But the thing that scared me, it actually scared me, is first night. Can I talk about?
Do it, man.
It was our first night. And we played a set, and we were out front just having a cigarette. I smoked then, And this cab pulls up, and no, car, not a cab, a car pulls up, and it was 2 black couples. And I never knew this about Chicago. And going into this club, it had a hood as you walk in, look, just like 52nd Street, New York, And they had a guard, a big, tall, heavy guy. And the two black couples went up to the doorway, and the guard said, can I help you? They said, yeah. And then they said, one of the guys said, we read in Downbeat magazine that Mike Maneri's going to be playing here tonight. So we're here to see Mike. And the guy comes right out and says, we don't allow any black people in here. And that totally, I got goose pimples all up and down my neck. I couldn't believe what I heard. I never witnessed that in Hartford,
Well, but I'm also confused because the South Side was primarily all black run. This club had no integrated. It was a white jazz club in the South Side of Chicago.
It wasn't a jazz club. It was just a neighborhood bar, and they were trying to start jazz there.
And they wouldn't allow any black people in.
Yeah, and somehow there was a drummer. He used to play with Bill Goodwin. Phil Woods from Springfield.
Yeah, Bill Goodwin.
And Bill Goodwin was his drummer. But before all that, Bill Goodwin lived here in L.A., and he was on the road with a singer, a black singer. And he heard about us playing in South Chicago. He would come in after their shows and sit in. I would let him sit in. We became pretty good friends,
Oh, he's a great drummer, too.
I haven't heard from him since.
And he's going to be tuning into this video and being inspired by it all.
He was a bitchin' drummer, man. I loved his playing, man.
Well, he was playing with
In fact,
yeah.
I learned a lot because he was a Philly guy too, and he used to tell me how he and Shelly Manne used to get into kind of not heated, but conversations about drummers, And I loved it because when I moved to L.A., I met Shelly. Yeah.
Well, no, the cool thing about Goodwin, too, is nobody knows this. He played on he was very close with Spencer Dryden, who was the drummer with Jefferson Airplane. Goodwin was all over the place. He was in psychedelic music. He was in jazz trio music.
Wow, I never knew that.
Yeah, he played with Bob Dorough on all those incredible multiplication rock albums. But, this is interesting. I've done a couple interviews with Steve Swallow, and
Steve played with us at the High Blind.
I want you to
Paul Bley.
So tell me, this is the thing. Two questions about this. He was in New Haven, and he wound up playing with some of the original blues masters, like blues players. Did you get a chance to play with them? You were just you were a jazzer through and through.
Yeah. I was just, I never left Hartford until I moved, here to L.A.
Do you think your ears, Joe, grew the most on the bandstand because you had to really listen? Not everything was mic'd. Sometimes there was just one microphone. Sometimes you couldn't even hear the other cat. When did your ears grow the most on the bandstand?
Well, I think just my ears, man, just listening. When I heard this music, I grew up in the Gene Krupa era, right? It was all swing kind of stuff. And I was walking to school one day. I was in high school, and I walked by this music store. It was a record shop, and the owner was an alto saxophone player, jazz player, and he had a speaker outside the store. So when we went to high school, walked to high school from Front Street, it was about a 1.5 mile, 2 mile walk. We walked right by his store, and he had the music glaring outside.
Blaring.
And I heard this music, and I said, Charlie Parker,
Right.
But I heard the drummer, and I said, man, what is he doing? What kind of jazz is that? All kind of bass drum work, were in swing.
Who was it? Tiny Khan? Who was the drummer? Who was the drummer?
With who?
With Bird.
With Bird, it was Max Roach.
And that was Roach.
Yes, the first records I ever heard of Charlie Parker, Max Roach was on drums. It was a Toronto, Canada album he made live from Toronto, Canada. Salt Peanuts and tunes like that. And in fact, I think on Salt Peanuts, the bass player hadn't showed up yet, and they recorded it without bass.
I love it.
And you could hear Max's bass drum.
Is it possible for the audience to not duplicate, but just sort of show what you were hearing that was different from the swing drumming that you had just become used to, that Max was doing?
Oh yeah.
Could you demonstrate?
Yeah, just except, yeah. I mean,
Live at Massey Hall was the name of the album.
yeah. I can't play fast like Max, you know.
No, you're
But
doing all right.
He was playing. You can't hear it, but the bass drum was doing this. Or that's a famous Max lick, you know. And in swing drumming, you have. Or it could have been 4/4 on the bass drum,
Right.
you know, but it wasn't so much in bebop the bass drum became a separate voice. You know what I'm saying? Right? Whereas swing, it was either in tune, which is more like Dixieland.
I love it. That's probably the best explanation I've heard out of all my interviews, and I've interviewed a lot of cats. But the bass drum became its own individual voice at that time.
That's what Max started, man. Well, I should back up a little bit. It was Max, Kenny Clark, but before those two guys, Sid Catlett. Your young drummers that are listening to this should go back and listen to Sid Catlett, and he kind of started that stuff.
Some people say that he was the first one to actually have a trap set.
Who?
A drum kit. Sid Catlett was the first one to have a drum kit.
It could be. I don't go. Well, I don't know about that because, a lot of people don't realize that in New Orleans,
Yeah.
there were some guys there in New Orleans that go way, way back, man. Before.
Yeah.
Everybody heard about Dixieland. And
You got any names to throw out? What kind of names?
No, I don't. There was, don't forget New Orleans back in the day. A lot of people came from France and Italy, but especially the people from France, they got into a nickname. It was like what they call Cajun music.
Sure.
So if you have any young listeners, it would do them a whole lot of good to look up some history books, go to YouTube, or whatever, and read up on where all this jazz started, man. And they're going to be surprised how many Europeans were involved in it all.
Well, like John Hendricks told me, without the late great John Hendricks, the singer, he said without the Sicilians there'd be no jazz in America because they had the clubs that actually you could play in.
Right.
You play in a lot of mafia clubs?
The only one I could think of between you and I, yeah, when I was a kid on Front Street, again, I had a buddy, Jack O'Connor,
Yeah.
a great jazz alto player, and we used to hang together. And we would go to Johnny Mac's on Sunday. Every Sunday afternoon at 5 o'clock, they'd have jazz. And we were too young, of course. We were like, 15, maybe 16. And he'd say, okay, stand behind the piano because if the police come in and see you guys, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. So we used to stand by the piano, and it was Dixieland then, where the bass drum was into, but the guys were incredible musicians. So, what I'm getting at, I heard it all, But what finally really locked me in was when I walked to school and heard, beep Charlie Parker outside that music store. And then we had a drummer in Hartford. There was a club called the Sundown, and there were two black clubs, nightclubs. The Club Sundown, and the Elks Club. And they were both in the black neighborhood. And this alto saxophone player friend of mine, he was a little bit older than me, but he took me under his arms and he says, come on, I'm going to take you to this jazz club, which was the Elks Club. And there was a drummer there, Walter Bolden.
Walter, yeah, I know, yeah, I've seen him on some very obscure albums.
Okay, let me tell you about Walter.
Yeah, please.
Walter, he was known as the bebop drummer in Hartford.
I love this.
And there was a bass player named Joe Calloway. They all lived in the black area in Hartford. And then they used to go down to This is how this started, and I'll give you some history. This all started when they used to go down to New Haven, Connecticut, to a jazz club called Lily's Paradise. And guess who was playing there with his trio? Horace Silver.
Right.
And they used to, come back and tell us all about it. There was a music school there called Hartford School of Music, not the Hart College of Music, the Hartford School.
Yeah, that's right. Hart is decorated.
Leapak taught at the Hart, at the Hartford School. I don't know if they had a drum, but anyways, under the GI Bill after the war, Walter Bolden went to the Hartford School of Music, and he invited Horace up to Hartford to play with him and Joe Calloway, and they formed a trio. And Walter flipped over Joe and Walter, and they started playing at the Elks Club and the Club Sundown.
Wow.
At the Club Sundown, they used to bring in, that was that was a bigger jazz club. More people went there, so they could spend more money. So they used to bring like a soloist from New York, like Stan Getz, you name it, man. Not Miles, but that caliber. I can't think of their names right now. But they used to bring artists up from New York, to play at the Sundown. Well, they formed this trio, and one week, Stan Getz comes and plays with them, and he freaked over them. And he says, "This is the band I've been waiting for." That's how it was related to me. And he took them on the road with him. And they went on the road with Stan Getz.
I was going to ask you.
Horace, Walter Bolden, and Joe Calloway. Now, I have to end it with this story.
Yeah, go ahead.
At the time, I had a day job. I was a stock boy in a department store, famous department store in Hartford called G. Fox and Company. And I worked in the perfume department, delivering perfume to the girls upstairs, I ring for the elevator door opens, and guess who's running the elevator? Joe Calloway. I could not believe
the
it.
bass player that Getz took on the road.
Can you imagine such a great bass player? And he ended up, I don't like to talk about it, but he got messed up.
Yeah.
With drugs and stuff.
Well, I'm curious to ask you how, Stan Getz, I've done 4 interviews for a documentary on Stan Getz, and he was a major abuser of drugs. And I'm curious about how you were able to. There was a period of time where in jazz in the 50s, I talked to David Amram about this. If you weren't on junk, you weren't trusted. How did you feel about that? How did you avoid the drugs?
I never had that problem. With the guys fluffing me off, I would play, and there was a bass player in Hartford, Mo Cloud. He contracted most of the black clubs there. There was a black club called the Subway right on Main Street in Hartford, and he hired me to play with his quartet. And it was a blind piano player, tenor player. His name, I don't know his last name, but they called him Blind Steve. And that was one of the best gigs I ever had in my life. With Mo Cloud on bass, myself on drums. I forgot the piano player's name. It was so long ago.
But they were all strung out.
And, no, not one of them.
Oh.
Oh, no. Mo Cloud was this, handsome black guy, man. Real dude, always dressed with a tie, man, No, seriously.
Yeah, I dig.
And I learned a lot from them. But that alto player I'm telling you about, Jack O'Connor, he was a junkie. And all my friends, 3 other friends, were all junkies. And I was with these guys, man, some nights where I saw them. Like one night we were in one of them's apartment, and I happened to open the door to the bathroom, and there he was. The needle was right in his arm, And he said, I had a nickname in those days. They called me Skinny. And he said, Skin, get out of here. This is not for you. Get out. So my own friends, and normally they want company when they're turning on. He told me to get out of the room. And I was an asthmatic in those days. And I used to have needles in me with adrenaline. They would put adrenaline in me to get my blood rushing and you could breathe faster. I had enough needles in me.
You didn't need any more needles. No, I mean
But it was the guy upstairs. However you want to figure it out, man. I never, I smoked a little pot here and there.
Nothing wrong with that.
I never got into, cocaine or heroin. And believe me, I was really among it, like you wouldn't believe.
Well, it was prevalent even when, I mean, when was the first time in a small jazz combo you actually toured?
Mike Maneri.
After that record?
After that record, we went to Chicago, and that was it. Yeah, I played in little bands around Connecticut, but not what you would call touring. The only other thing that happened after Mike is a bass player, John Jufrida, Juf they used to call him, recommended me to Bobby Hackett. And I went on the road with Bobby for a couple of months.
Who was in that group? That's pretty traditional.
Dave McKenna on piano.
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful
Holy
piano.
cow, yeah, this is...
Bobby, myself on drums, and Juf on bass.
Playing the Roosevelt Grill or something.
We played the Embers
yeah.
on 3rd Avenue, places like that, opposite Teddy Wilson. And then we played the Embers in St. Louis. Oh, man, we went to Milwaukee and Wisconsin. We toured quite a bit. We never got as far as California with Bobby. And then I made a record with Bobby at Capitol Records in New York. It was called Blues with a Kick.
I could be asking your sons about this, but I wanted to ask you about the idea of when you first started playing drums. Drums were really an accompanist instrument. It was for colors. It was not pulsating bass drums at the forefront of the music. Today's music, it's in your face and you hear the drums. They're heavy and they're right there. Can you talk about, is that accurate in the sense of when you started to play drums, what was your goal was it as an accompanist as opposed to just driving as a driving lead instrument?
Well, that all came to me, like anything else that you're learning. My teacher, again, part of my lesson with my teacher was, dynamics. Part of being musical is
dynamics.
You have to use
missing
dynamics.
In modern music today.
Yes, to be musical, you have to apply. So I played ahead of a tune, loud enough so that it blends with everybody, and then when the first soloist is improvising, I come way down. Now, Elvin wouldn't do that, or people like that, or Philly, but at times they would.
Right.
But I had a thing going for myself where I'd come way down, and as the chorus is built, I built, and I would listen to the soloist, and the more he got into it, of course I tried to feed off of him, answer him, if I heard a figure, ba do ba, boom ba do ba, I'd answer him,
A call and response.
Yes, exactly, without losing the form, and then eventually by his second chorus, I'm up there with him, and if it's a soloist that's really getting into it, well, then I start to bash a little bit, and get into it with him. Otherwise, he's left all alone. He's going to get upset at me, if I don't go along with him. And then, bash. Next guy, I come right back down again, for the next soloist. And that's kind of the routine I, dwelled on.
This is more of a rhythm philosophical question, but I want you to talk about, because you guys with Amel and you were playing in all these odd meters, and that's the studio calling for you right now. But
She got it.
She got it. Yeah. I'd like you to talk about the concept of being in a small combo, and maybe a quintet or a quartet, and you're playing improvisational music, and you play the head of the tune, and then you leave the head of the tune, and everybody loses where the one is, the downbeat. okay, and then collectively as a group, everybody comes back in on the one.
Right.
It's a very special feeling. So I want to ask you here, Joe Porcaro, legend, titan, going into the Percussive Arts Hall of Fame. Tell me about your philosophy that any note can be the one. Just your philosophy on it.
Well, if everybody feels, if they have the same concept at the same time, they're all thinking about it, and I would think the drummer would nod with his head where one is, But when I play, I try not to, no matter what's going on, that hi-hat is on 2 and 4, So no matter what happens, if they're not listening to the hi-hat, But I've heard guys, because they're so into what they're gonna play, they kind of, especially if I start phrasing
Right.
in 3 against 4, like I do a thing over 2 bars. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3. No, I'm sorry. One more time. One, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4. Yeah, 2 3s and a 2 over 2 bars.
That's what Emil was talking about today.
And I kind of get into that. But I'll only use that in a closing phrase. Like if you're playing the blues,
Yeah.
the 11th and 12th bar, I'll use that concept as a turnaround, going back to 1.
Was there a band that you can point to where you guys got off on leaving the head of the tune and play? I mean, because the late, great Sonny Fortune, he just passed away, was with Rashid Ali on the road, and they'd play 45-minute duos, and there'd be no... They lost track of tick-tock time, but they always came back in together. And Bud Shank did that. I'm trying to think of who I was interviewing the other day. Oh, Dennis Budemer I just saw.
Yeah.
And Budemer said him and Peacock would just play for 40 minutes on the bandstand together. Uh-huh. And was there a time when you would when you guys would try to lose the one and come back in on it?
I never got... I have to be honest.
I love it. I want honesty, man.
It never happened to me. I mean, when I was a kid, maybe.
Yeah, right.
But when I turned professional and, was playing with some good musicians, that never happened to me. I played with guys that lost it, and I would nod my head to them where one was.
dig. So the drummer's responsibility, know where the one is. That's it.
Because I had to be careful. And this is for guys in the future, when they learn about these rhythmical concepts, over 2 bars, playing, 2 3s and a 2, which equal 8, right? And let's see, over 4 bars. I'd have to think about it.
I mean, just the spirit.
But I just want. So, anyways, what was it? Where were we at?
I
kind of got lost.
Well, no, I was asking you about those microtonal bands that Emil and you were in with Ray Neapolitan, Dave Mackay. You guys were playing stuff, 76 bars. And I just feel like you guys were almost getting off on the idea of losing the one, but you were talking about just nodding, giving nonverbal instruction to people if they did get off the one as the drummer.
Just nodding my head. But that stuff with Emil, all those odd meter things we did, we rehearsed. It was all form, man. There was no mystery to it, seriously.
Yeah, sometimes to the non-musician, it does seem magical.
Well, yeah, but I'll give you an example. Yeah. Tom Scott wrote a blues. Blues for Harry, it was called.
I know that tune.
And it was in 7.
My favorite tune.
It's you can't believe how musical.
John Guerin's on drums on that.
Yeah, exactly.
Roger Kellaway piano.
Exactly. And I did it with Dave Mackay, blind piano.
I'm still looking for Mackay, dude. He's hiding from me. I'm gonna go track him down.
He's here. He lives in.
I know he's here.
North
I've been looking to get him to talk to him for years. Anyway, go ahead.
But anyways, Dave was a master at that, and we did this album. He and I, Ray Neapolitan, and his wife sang. I can't.
Vicky Hamilton.
What's Vicky Hamilton? That was her.
You were on drums on that album?
Yeah.
Wow.
I played drums.
That album smokes.
Well, that was Blues for Hari, and Tom Scott musically did a masterful job of writing that tune. Every bit of it makes so much musical sense. The turnaround, the out chorus, like the very last bar, is 4 3s and a 2. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1, back to 1, and it was in 7. The whole tune was in 7, and man, in fact, Ralph Humphrey called me once. You know of Ralph Humphrey,
The baddest drummer.
incredible, and he's my partner at L.A. College of Music in Pasadena.
Oh, I got to connect with that cat.
Oh, you got it.
No, he used to play with Zappa, man. He was playing with everybody.
You have to.
I got to talk to Ralph. Yeah, I did.
This guy is the most underrated drummer, professor, knowledgeable about odd meters, about anything. He can write. He can play piano. Really, he's a monster, man. I love that guy, man. He's inspired me in more ways because we have a relationship going all the way back. Well, after Steve Bohannon got killed in an auto accident, I was in the band when that happened. I was playing percussion, one of my first gigs when I moved out here. And Don Ellis went up north and played at a college up there, and Ralph was a student, and then Don, people told Don Ellis about Ralph Humphrey, so Don didn't bring a drummer with him. He trusted them, and he used Paul Humphrey.
I did. Right.
He made Paul Humphrey move to L.A. And my first time I met Ralph Humphrey, we were doing an album with Don Ellis.
Double drums?
No, Ralph played
Percussion.
timpani with me, and I played percussion. And then Alan Estes, who was the percussionist, while Steve Bohannon was on drums, Alan took over the drum chair.
Not Gene, you're talking Alan.
Alan, right.
I just caught a hang. Alan, it was just great. About 2 months ago, I was at his house with Neapolitan and John Morell for an impromptu jam session. Bunch of badass cats, dude.
Okay.
So that is Joe, I just, one of the L's on my program is life. And what I mean by life is overcoming adversity. And the picture behind you on the right-hand side is your son, Jeffrey Porcaro. And when I talk to Keltner, I could talk to anybody, and their heart warms when they talk about Jeffrey Porcaro, just his feel, his groove, and just the kind of person that he was. But I do want you to talk to the audience as somebody who is, knock on wood, healthy, still playing, still teaching, still thriving. How did you overcome his death, and how did it make you a stronger person?
Well, of course it was. I couldn't believe I was at Warner Brothers doing a movie. In fact, Amo was on it too, and it was. I can't think of a famous producer, Clint Eastwood.
Wow.
Blood in and Out.
Blood in and
name
Out.
of the movie, and.
You were playing drums on it?
No, I was playing percussion. There was no
You play
drummer.
so much good percussion.
Yeah,
Too.
I was playing. In fact, I think I was playing timpani on it. And anyways, I got the phone call from one of the stagehands, and when I heard that, I just couldn't believe it, and I rushed to the hospital, and I didn't get there in time. And when I saw Jeffrey laying on that table, man, me and my wife, I just couldn't believe it. And the reason it was a really terrible shock to me, because I was on the phone with him in the morning, that very morning, for a half an hour. And I had to go because I had a date at Warner's at 10, And I just had to excuse myself. I need to run to work. And I couldn't believe it, man. He was fine. Talking about family and all that, And then I get that phone call. And, all those years of Jeffrey, all of a sudden, because it was special to me with Toto and David Page and all those guys, because I brought Jeffrey with me.
I know.
I was doing a Glenn Campbell show. And, I getting ready to go to my car to go to work, and Jeff says, Dad, can I come with you? And he was about 15, maybe early 16, but I think he was about 15. And anyways, so I took him with me. And it was a dress rehearsal for Glenn Campbell. And I had him sit in the corner because we did some recording,
Sure.
And I told him, whenever you see that red light go on, don't you dare make a move. Don't squeak on that stool, So then everything was going fine, and all of a sudden the contractor, Red Mandel, comes over to me and says, who's that little boy over there sitting in the corner? I says, that's my son. He said, what are you doing? You don't bring your kids on a session like this. This is business. I said, yeah, well, I thought it would be cool. Summertime, he's home from school. He said, no, don't do it anymore. And I said, well, I wanted him to meet David Page, because Marty Page was conducting the orchestra.
That's right.
And he would have David come, and Don Trenner was the piano player. And Marty would say to Don, let my son sit in, during the rehearsals.
Right.
Sometimes. He wanted him to get some experience.
And he was a musician, so then that was cool.
Right. So...
Had Jeffrey started playing drums at that point?
Yeah, he was playing. So David came over. Jeff and I were talking, and I waved to David. David came over, and I says, hey, I want you to meet my son, Jeff, And that's where Toto started, man. That's where Toto started. Everybody doesn't realize that. You hear all these stories. I'm
so psyched to get that on the record. That is fantastic.
When I was doing Glenn Campbell, right, David would come over and rap with me. I was behind a glass cage so the temps and everything wouldn't leak into the strings, And so David would come over and he says, Joe, he says, I wanted to play drums too. I actually have a set of drums, He said, that's what I really wanted to play. So we got talking. I told him about Jeff. I says, I have a son, I says, I don't know, I'm his dad, and I may be, a little bit...
biased, but subjective.
But I think he's got it,
Yeah.
So I says, I'm going to bring him someday. So, that was the day I brought him. So anyways, they hooked up, they exchanged phone numbers, and then we went to lunch. And the drummer with the band on our show was Paul Humphrey. Not Ralph.
I was listening to him play with Charles Kennard before. No, dude, he played with Lawrence Welk.
Yeah.
Ferocious drummer.
He was the drummer. So we go to lunch.
I love this.
We come back into the studio, and there's David and Jeff rocking and rolling.
Oh, man.
They were I wish I had a
They were cooking the groove, man.
They were. And Paul Humphrey says, who's that playing my drums? Who's that? Who's that?
It's like Philly Joe talking to you at story. But do you still?
So that's how it started, man. Jeff had a band that took the same name as Tom Scott and John Morella and those guys from Grant High School. It was called Rural Still Life, and Tom Scott started that band, and then later, I think Alan Esses played drums. Or either Steve Bohannon, But later on, John Guerin started playing with them. And it was called Real Still Life. And so Jeff had those guys all graduated high school and they became famous studio players and, jazz and all that.
DeMonico and those cats.
Exactly.
Mike Lang, yeah.
Exactly. So Jeff and Paige continued the name with Rural Still Life, and they used to rehearse in my garage. And Steve Lukather was going to high school, same high school.
This is unbelievable.
And that's how this Toto started. Don't listen to anybody, man.
Listen to this interview. We got the real story.
That's where it started.
Because there's stuff all over the place. Do you still feel his spirit? Does he come?
Man,
does he come in dreams to you?
Look, I'm in here almost every night with my little, Mac.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to Toto. I'm listening to Georgie Porgy, tunes like that. I'm listening to Steely Dan,
Oh.
And then there's interviews on the internet where he did clinics at MI, Musicians Institute. I don't know if you ever saw any of those, but there's one, and this was toward the end, where he went in there and he did this like 2-hour interview, and the kids are just asking him questions, and they're freaking out that he didn't even have a set of drums at home. From the time he made that Boss Skaggs album, never. I don't know if anywhere where Jeff lived that he had a set of drums set up to practice. The only practicing he did between you and I was on his coffee table. On Sunday, he used to love to watch the pro football games. And he'd have that Ludwig, rubber pad that fit on a, table. And that's the only practicing he ever did because he was playing so much.
Well, that's why.
He never had time to practice.
He didn't, and he had his chops down.
And I worked with him, when we moved to California. He was great. I didn't have to, give him a hard time about practicing. At that time, he had no gigs. He wasn't well known then. So he did practice, In fact, I talked him into going to a percussion ensemble group weekends in the neighborhood. A guy had he was from SC. He had a percussion ensemble where he would give lessons to, young drummers that wanted to get into percussion ensemble. He'd have all the percussion set up. And so Jeff, a lot of people don't realize he did a lot of reading going to that percussion, rehearsal every Saturday. And then in Grant, they had the brass and woodwind ensemble with the percussion section. And I'd drive them all over. I wasn't that busy in those days. I'd take them to different schools around L.A. And then he appeared with the with Paige and the guys. This was before Toto. They had a little quintet, that group that was starting the starting of Toto.
Rural Still Life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they applied, and those days, every summer, the Hollywood Bowl would have the Battle of the Bands. And these groups, small groups, big bands from all over L.A., South L.A., all over, would come to the Hollywood Bowl. And Jeff and the guys, they went as a jazz quintet. And they, they lost. They came in about third, I think.
Do you have tapes of that?
Do I have what?
You have recordings of that?
No. Too bad. But anyways, when the show was over, they had singers, choral groups from, L.A., from Watts, from all over. And they did this, what do they call it? In the black churches, what's that music called?
The sanctified music.
But no, there's a word for it. I can't think of it.
Shame on me for not knowing it either.
But it's gospel music. And they asked Jeff to play with the band for the gospel choir. And they got into this 12/8 rockish thing. When the show was over, they announced all the winners, right? In the audience is Claire Fisher, Lalo Schifrin, and I think it was Henry Mancini as judges.
Wow.
And after the lady announced all the winners, she says, tonight is a first for us. She says, for the first time, we're going to have a trophy for the outstanding musician of the night, Jeffrey Porcaro. I couldn't believe it, man. I had
He was
tears
playing
in
that
my-
gospel blues shuffle perfectly, though. He was nailing it.
And Mike was on bass.
Before we wrap up, can you
So
play?
those are moments, you know.
Well, I mean,
And then, you know, I come in here, man, and I cry. I play Georgie Porgy, that groove, man. You know, you know what the hardest part is, man? How many years ago did that happen? You know, he was, what, 38?
It was very sudden. Yeah, yeah.
38, 48, 58, 68, 78, you know. Am I right? You know, it's about 50 years ago. And we still get email and, you know, text how he's missed, and people from Europe and from the far, you know, Japan and, you know, Korea, people miss his playing, miss him. It doesn't stop, man.
No, and neither does music. And before I let you go, could you just play something for Jeffrey, in honor of Jeffrey, on the drum kit?
Yeah, I'm going to play,
Play whatever you want.
there's a theme song. I hope they can hear it. It's called The Theme by Miles Davis.
Oh.
Ba-da-da-da-da, da-da, ba-da-da-da-da,
Yeah, sure.
ba-boo-da. And it's the form is AABA.
Joe Porcaro on his way to the Percussive Arts Hall of Fame this Thursday.
1, 2, 1, 2.
Joe Porcaro, much love to you, man. Thank you for being part of the program, man. You were great.
Okay, thank you very much. And it was really a pleasure to meet you. Good luck with your show.
Yeah, we'll keep going, man. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. See you all later.